My name is Josh Argentine. I'm presenting for Dr. Cohen's workshop group, and we are covering the New York City Council Introduction 942, Replacement of Lead Water Service Pipes. So as you can see here, this is my amazing team. They're the people that are really responsible for all of this. They did all the hard work compiling the data, and then I'm just the one who gets to present it to you. So here is an overview at a high level of what I'll be covering. So first we'll dive into what the problem is that we're trying to address. Next, we'll go into our bill and what it does to address this problem. And then we'll go to our suggested solution and what that looks like. Then additional considerations to take into account. And lastly, what our overall conclusions are. So as you can see here, New York City is very proud of its tap water. It has given itself the title of having the champagne of tap water, or the champagne of drinking water. This is because its water is largely fed from the Catskill Mountains and comes in so clean that it doesn't need to be treated. However, is this true for everyone drinking New York City tap water? As you can probably guess, it is not. Up to 2 million people in New York City any given day are drinking out of lead water pipes and therefore have lead in their drinking water. So these people are certainly not drinking the champagne of tap water. They're more likely drinking the flat beer of tap water. So I just said lead pipes. What I'm really referring to is lead service lines. So as you can see there, highlighted the red line, that is the service line. It's the smaller pipe that connects to the larger city-owned water main. The water comes through the water main and then into the service line and then ultimately into either your apartment or house. So if that service line happens to be made of lead, then it will leach lead into the water that goes through it, resulting in lead exposure and then ultimately negative health outcomes for the people who drink that water. So what are these negative health outcomes? To note before we get into this, lead exposure is not safe for anyone, adults or children. We are focusing, however, on children because they're the most vulnerable group, and that's for a couple reasons. Firstly, they have greater exposure because they absorb a higher percentage of the lead that they are exposed to and that they ingest. Secondly, they're still developing. So when they ingest this lead, it deposits into their organ systems, into their brain, and then as they develop the effects of that expound over time as that development is impeded. So in the short term, this just looks like things like confusion, nausea, muscle fatigue, but in the long run, it has much more serious consequences, things like kidney damage, decreased IQ, increased blood pressure, and therefore cardiovascular disease, and then cognitive disorders like ADHD can all arise from prolonged lead exposure. So in New York City, who's affected? So up to 29% or roughly 30% of anyone in New York on a given day is going to be drinking lead-contaminated water. This equates to over 900,000 households and roughly 2 million individuals that are drinking water containing lead into it on a daily basis. This is a problem in all 5 boroughs of New York, and so it is really a pervasive issue throughout the city. So given that, what are we going to do about it? We're going to replace the pipes. I think that's pretty straightforward. That tracks with me. I imagine that tracks with you. You got a lead pipe, it's putting lead in the water. You take out the lead pipe, less lead in the water. That is pretty much what our bill is trying to do. To give you a high-level overview of the bill, it gives a 10-year timeline to replace all the lead service lines in New York City. It prioritizes replacing them in child care facilities so as to minimize children's exposure like we talked about. There's a $1,000 fine if you do not replace your lead pipes. A $500 fine if you do, but you do not get them certified. And then lastly, the New York City Department of Environmental Protection is who's going to spearhead and oversee this initiative to replace the lead service lines. So how are we going to replace the pipes? I'm not going to break all this down to you. I'm just going to have you look at that center column there where it says trenchless pull-through. This is the method that we're going to recommend. All those negative factors on the left, you can see it's low in, it's medium in cost, but none of them are low in cost. So it's the overall best method. And what that looks like is something like this. So basically, a single pit is dug. They go in, grab the lead line, and yank it out. And as it's coming out, they feed in a copper line right behind it. This eliminates the need to dig a large trench all the way from the water main to the house or apartment. So it's less disruptive and less costly than other options. After the lead line is taken out, it's temporarily stored in hazardous material storage, and then ultimately transported to either a hazardous waste facility or a lead recycling facility. And it's worth noting that of lead that is still used in industries today, over 50% of that lead comes from recycled lead rather than new mined lead. So lead recycling is a large-scale process that is utilized today. Okay, so the lead pipes are out. What happens to the drinking water? The purple there on that graph is the amount of lead in the water. What that is showing you is that within 3 days of replacing the lead service line, levels are down more than 50% in the amount of lead in the water. And then at 1 month, levels have decreased by up to 80% from pre-replacement levels. So it has both immediate and drastic effects on the amount of lead in the drinking water by replacing the lead service line. And then lastly, for our solution is to measuring the success of the program overall. We have 3 key indicators that we've highlighted. They are water lead level, blood lead level, and then final health outcomes. There's a couple action levels below water lead level and blood lead level there that you can see. And what these are driving at is really minimizing that exposure. That's the underlying issue. And the key indicator that minimizing that drives at is final health outcomes. This is things that I mentioned before, like cardiovascular disease, decreased IQ, ADHD. And the EPA actually has a federal framework for monitoring the decreased incidence of these diseases, and then therefore putting a monetary value to that. And that's something that we can borrow to measure the final health outcomes in New York City. So problem solved, right? We know what the issue is. We know how we're going to take them out. We know how we're going to measure the success. Not quite, unfortunately. There are some further considerations that we need to take into account to determine how effective this bill is going to be. So those considerations at a high level are technical, equity, and economic considerations. So first, technical complexities. I think this picture by itself does a pretty good job of explaining what those are. Under the streets and sidewalks of New York, there's water lines, gas lines, electric lines, internet lines, lines in use, lines out of use. It's really a labyrinth down there. And so this poses a unique challenge in New York City of actually getting to the lead service line and being able to take it out. Additionally, there are some equity concerns. As I mentioned earlier, there is 10 years allotted in this bill for these lead service lines to be replaced. In that time, there still will be exposure to lead for the houses that haven't had their lead lines replaced yet. So there are interim solutions that can be used like home filters, but these are more than just your standard Brita filter. They're actually pretty expensive, so there will be unequal access to these amongst income levels, and the bill has no provisions for interim filters. Additionally, renters who make up 69% of New York City residents don't control their own water. So if their landlord decides that they don't want to replace the lead service line, they don't have any recourse for ensuring that they have clean water making it to their house. And then lastly, lowest income households are going to be the ones most likely to avoid the cost of replacing the service lines. And that cost sort of ties into our last consideration, which is economic. And I think that on the left sort of sums it up. Replacing lead service lines is expensive. The penalty in this bill is not. It's $10,000 to $15,000 to replace a service line. The fine for not replacing your service lines is $1,000 in this bill. So property owners and landlords do not have a financial incentive for replacing their service lines. Additionally, if they do replace them, they can pass on that cost by raising rent, and then the estimated total cost of replacing all these service lines is upwards of $2 billion. So our conclusions. Our conclusions are pretty straightforward. This is a real problem. It's affecting 2 million people today, yesterday, tomorrow. Every day in New York City, people are drinking lead-contaminated water. The solution is clear but complex. We need to replace these service lines, and we need to prioritize children as we do so. However, that's easier said than done. The complicated and costly logistics that go into this will certainly pose a challenge. And then lastly, we have a complex bit of policy in Introduction 942. It makes a good faith effort to attempt to solve this problem. However, it does have some critical shortcomings that could result in the problem persisting. So I'm going to leave you here. That's a picture of the water in the Catskill Mountains. If we're able to replace these lead service lines, that water will be exactly the same water coming out of your taps in New York City for everyone in New York City. And so we all will get to enjoy the champagne of tap water. Thank you so much. Any questions? Mr. Johnson.
I actually have two questions, but
Right.
I'll only do one, which is that you said that replacing the pipes, you could see the decline in lead by 50% after 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Why the lag
So it
90 days out or whatever it was?
lead, the exact science of how lead deposits in pipes, it's like anode and cathode, like battery type stuff that I don't know that well, but basically it deposits into other materials. So it comes out, it dissolves into the water, and then it can deposit onto an iron pipe, and then it can then dissolve off that iron pipe and deposit on a copper pipe. So there is a slight lag in all of it getting out because it's deposited in other pipes.
Hello. So I have one question. So you mentioned that renters do not control their tap water. So I wonder, like, if they know they're drinking, those lead water.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the provisions of the bill is the Department of Environmental Protection for New York City is required to educate people on who has lead and who doesn't in their service lines because we don't know the exact, like what percentage of people know that they have lead service lines, but the general understanding is that it's pretty low. So for the most part, no, they probably don't know that they have lead in their service lines. So that is why that's a provision in the bill, is to educate people that they do. And obviously they can try to put some pressure if they have a management company to try to get them to change that.
Thank you very much.
I have a question about projected backlash. Is there expected to be resistance against this? I would imagine the lowest income communities that don't really have the financial option to replace the lines, then having to pay a fine because they don't have that option seems controversial.
Yeah, so that's actually the one slide I have in the appendix will be useful. So these are a couple. Newark and Madison both had successful. They replaced all the lead service lines in their cities, obviously significantly smaller cities than New York City. However, Newark specifically had full cost subsidy. So that was very helpful to getting all of them out. Madison was sort of the opposite. It had more of like a stick method. It was up to $1,000 fine daily if you didn't. So regardless of the backlash, people still replaced them because they didn't want that fine. There is really neither one of those in this bill, so that is certainly an issue, and why we brought it up in both equity and economic is that it is a large expense, and so for someone on the Upper West Side who finds out they have a lead water or lead service line, yeah, they're going to replace it like that. But for a house in the Bronx that maybe doesn't qualify for any sort of subsidy in this bill, they're going to be much more likely to avoid that cost.